Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I am drinking from a mug of tea right now that I've just made, and this is very apt because the mug says "Burn brightly, burn," and it has a picture of the Kremlin on it. And that is very apt for this discussion because we're going to talk about long distance strikes and mid range strikes that the Ukrainians have been doing. And it's an absolute obsession of mine of late because I think, or not of late, for years I've been saying this is the key to Ukraine, both militarily and economically prevailing in the war. And what's fantastic is that Daniele and co-author Atin Noktwa, they have written an article that looks at the data. We love to be make sure that we are justified in our opinions by looking at the data, and they've looked at the data of these strikes, and we're going to talk through an article that they have written together looking at the trends going on here. So I'm really pleased to welcome back, and he's just told me it's probably over a year since we last spoke, which is criminal. But I'd love to welcome back Daniele from Tochnyi to talk about what he's found out. Daniele, thank you so much for coming back. Do you want to just introduce yourself and what your expertise is and what you guys do at Tochnyi?
Hi everyone. Thank you, Jonathan, for hosting me here today. Yes, I think that one of our last live was about, I think, long-range strikes at a very, very early stage when we start to talk about Taurus and Storm Shadow and so on. So I'm an analyst into Tochnyi, which is essentially a community project where we tried to create an informed public with actual data and fact-based research. And recently, I think this is public now, we have become also an NGO.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And we are trying essentially to work with the different type of bodies to try to fund research and fund very good researcher within and also outside Tochnyi. I'm currently the president, but this is not a eternal charge. Every year we will have internal election to determine who is going to be the president and so on. And so we at Tochnyi, we value very much research and open mind as well. So we always try to don't focus too much on what we like to see, but what we really see inside the stories. You are now showing one of other project that we have inside Tochnyi, which is a Human Safari project, which is done in close collaboration with Andrew Perpetua, where the guys have been working for more than a year in order to track down essentially every single dot that you guys see on that map is a strike on a civilian, on a person, using FPV drone, and these crimes are perpetrated mostly by troops, Russian troops in the other side of the Dnipro River. We know that especially new pilots tends to train in this way. This is a trend that has been going on along the entire front line, but in Kherson has reached proportion beyond the imagination. And yeah, it's very. I don't work on this very much because it's very grim work.
Yeah, and I've been in contact. I've interviewed Brendan Kelly a number of times, who's helped on this as well, and he was due to come and talk about this, and we never got around to actually finalising that. So you've reminded me, I must get back in touch with him. But yeah, so Tochnyi does a number of things, and what's great is the desire to be as forthright as possible in arguing for or against disinformation and misinformation, and arguing for accuracy, and that's very important, but also being data driven. There's an awful lot of data concerned with what you have written in this article, but in what Tochnyi do in general, there's a lot of data that you guys collect and synthesize. Andrew Perpetua's numbers that he brings out routinely are part of that kind of remit. And so, yeah, just fantastic. And I just want to give a shout out. Obviously, you've got a co-author here, but also to Chris Jones from Clockwork Design, who just does an immense amount of work with you guys on your design, on your graphical representation of stuff. And he also helps out with my like patches and logo design as well. So thank you, all different designs that he's done. So he's just a legend. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, talk us through, you know, what work you've been doing here.
So this essentially is a collateral work done by a small group of people, including myself and another couple of people inside Tochnyi who prefer to stay anonymous. And essentially everything started since June. You remember I started to track and explain long-range strikes. And the initial reason for doing so was to try to explain to the public what is long-range strikes, what type of operation you can perform when you do long-range strikes, so the different type of targets. I also try to explain why Russia tends to aim also on civilian, of course, because there is a precise strategy behind that, which we know doesn't work since World War II, which is essentially strike against the civilian population. And so we start to accumulate a very conspicuous database of strikes done in occupied Ukraine and Russia since June on whatever target, from ammo depot, oil infrastructure, transportation, train system, and also air defense. But we start to see a pattern, especially in correlation with some of these type of targets, because we start to see that after a large amount of strikes on air defense, we start to see an increase in certain categories. So we initially believe that this was just, you know, a coincidence, but then we start to realize that this is not. And in particular, as you will see from the map that we decide to put at the very beginning of the article, because it's impressive when you see that, there is a substantial increase in strikes also in Crimea and in the southern region of Russia. And
so I just to interrupt you, I
yeah.
report on this daily in my Hits and Losses videos, and I've for a long time been very excited about Primari as a unit, the Ghost unit, and they were taking out these air defense radars, air defense launchers in Crimea, and then they started moving elsewhere, and then other units are doing whatever they're doing. But that's kind of what you're meaning, isn't it? These units that are using mid-range strikes in this case to take out the air defenses.
Most of the time FP2 drones, which have been a very successful platform, honestly, and probably one of the reasons why there is so much expectation for FP7, despite FP7. So for the who doesn't know, FP7 is Flamingo, the big cruise missile.
Well, that's the FP5, isn't it? The FP7's a ballistic.
Oh yes, sorry, FP5 and FP7. So the FP2 is a drone essentially, and has been very successful. So, but the problem is that the team that is behind FP2 is different from FP5 and 7. So I don't know how much these can, you know, but anyway, Firepoint has for sure cash flow thanks to FP2, and but also we have seen also use of normal FPV drone in certain cases, because the strike that the Ukrainians have been able to do are, as the article states, gone from short range to long range, essentially. We say long range strikes, but in reality, this is an umbrella of different types of strikes that the Ukrainians have been capable of performing. And in particular, the article tries to, first of all, give a statistics of what has been, this is FP2. Very, 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 very good drone, honestly. And the article investigated essentially first of all, if there was a preference in type of strikes. Then we tried to geolocate as much as possible, but of course there are limitations in what we can do. And so over 433 strikes. In reality, the article now talks only about the strikes on radar and launcher, essentially, or command center, essentially computers that run the air defense system. But we have around 492, so there are roughly 50 strikes that we left out, which are on logistics or command center, HQ, ammo depot, stuff like this. So we decide to keep them out because otherwise would create too much confusion. So we wanted to focus only on the asset, the pure asset for air defense. And the results, I mean, have been incredible because first of all, Athena, he went, he tried to do some research. He did some research and investigated through geolocation the essentially how many platform like S300 or Nebo have been moved around. I think that there is, if you go down, there is a very nice graphics that we created to show this one. So essentially, no, this one is for is with the data of A22, another OSINTER. Now, if you go up, yeah, this one. You just passed.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, this one here. Yeah.
This one. So this one essentially show you in an interactive way. If you click on next change and percentage next change, you can see essentially the diminishing number of platform, in particular S300, S400. Now, this doesn't mean that they are all destroyed. In fact, many of them probably are just redeployed, and by the nature of the fact that these are mobile air defense system, they are scattered around the entire front line. And so this is very difficult to understand if all of them has been destroyed. But it's important to say that when you start to move stuff from the homeland in order to bring them on the front line, this means that you are under some kind of pressure. Of course, again, we can't say 100%. All this is because of attrition, but we know that for a matter of technicality that Russia is, and also for Russia's itself estimates, they say that they are not producing more than a handful of the system per year. Now, even if this is not true, and they are probably lying about that, it may be a bit higher, but the number that we found are significant. Even for us as NATO, losing that many systems would be even not possible in some cases because we don't have enough.
Yeah. Can I just get some clarification then? So what this graphic tells us is the number of air defense systems. Does that include the radars? Is that like the batteries? Is it, or launchers, or these whole?
This is the whole infrastructure of the
right. Okay. So yeah. So the systems. So this is how many you had before the war. How many you think you've got now, and the difference between the two, which is going to be attrition. Does it take into account building new ones? Do you know how many they build of these?
In this graph, you don't have these, and unfortunately, we don't have access on exactly how many they produce, because this is a very close guarded secret. But the fact that we see movement of this type of system from a region, even from Vladivostok, and also we have seen a suspension of export of some of these in the early stage of the war, says us that the production is not very high. And it's not to say that the Russians are not capable. These are complex systems and requires time to be built. If you think that also for US took an year to double the production, but still the production in terms of radar still not going to cover such big losses unless you really enter in a war economy where you produce in mass. So if you start to go down in the article, we started to categorize the losses, and you find one of the first more interesting graph, which is about a bar chart about the Russian SAM launcher system. And these, of course, include the Buk, the Tor, and Pantsir, Tunguska, and also the radar associated with them. Because thanks to the videos, we were able to know when an S400 radar or an S300 radar was hit. okay, rather than the launcher. And you can see that the radar, for example, for the S-400 are a very good prey. Why? Because of course, destroying a radar is much more valuable in terms of damage that you cause to another armed forces, because it's much difficult even to repair. It's simply madness. Instead, imagine to rebuild one. Instead, if you destroy a launcher, in the end, the damage it's limited. It's substantial,
Well,
but it's limited.
it's not just that though. Like, if you can't acquire the target, then your launches are pointless, right? So you can, so say you've got 4 launchers in a battery with a radar, and the radar supplies the information to the launchers. If you take out the radar, those 4, it's functionally the same, or at least going to be somewhat similar to taking out the 4 launchers.
Yes, but also no. I mean, yes, in general, yes, but there is a caveat here. And I have to be honest, I was educated on the matter from Vincent, another member of our of Tochnyi, who has a very in-depth knowledge about Russian air defense systems. And he explained to me that essentially, not too much time ago, but recently, essentially, Russia started to use. I mean, when I say recently, in the last decade, they start to introduce something that is an automatic targeting and target acquisition and managing system, or ADS, if I recollect correctly. And these are essentially very big calculator. Now, their scope is to gather the data, as we do, from all the type of sensor that they have on the battlefield, also other system integrated in a network, as the Ukrainian do as well. And in this way, essentially, even if you lose a radar in a position, you may have others around that can help you. So at the moment, apart from one case, we haven't seen any of these destroyed, and the reason is because Russia is really careful in exposing them. But if you destroy one of them, what you said is 100% correct, because then you lose, essentially, they return back of 10, 20 years, where each air defense system is a kind of disconnected, is not in a network. Now, why you see so many Buk and Tor, for example? The reason is because these are closer to the front line, so are more exposed to the attrition that we essentially are seeing, and also because, for example, Tor and Buk, they are a good system, and they are a problem for long-range strikes, even when you want to use a Storm Shadow or HIMARS, essentially. So these type of systems have been targeted for a reason. This entire campaign has been designed not only to create a problem in terms of economy of scale of the air defense system, but to introduce holes in the already overstretched and very thin line of defense that Russia has between itself and Ukraine missiles and long-range drone. Because, and I think you interviewed someone yesterday. I was listening to the live for a minute, and he's right. Once you penetrate the first few hundred kilometers, and you're not getting along or too close to Moscow, there is not much left. So essentially, you have entered the Russian airspace, and at that point, there is not very much that they can do. So this is why we
this is something I've talked. Sorry, this is something I've talked about quite a lot previously, which is that just from a logical point of view, if I was running air defenses in Russia, I'd be like packing all of my air defenses in. Ukraine can only fire over their borders, right? They can't fire over Belarus. They can't do this. They can't do that. They basically have very limited places they can fire to get their rockets and missiles across over into Russia and into these towards these targets. And so you're going to be loading all of your air defenses in a kind of, I would have thought, in some kind of buffer zone, hit in some kind of zone just across the border. And once you start degrading these areas, then that allows you the ability to send your drones. So we've seen a load of drones hit St. Petersburg just now, and that's been as a result of Ukraine clearly having degraded, I would have thought, air defenses in this region of Bryansk, so that they can send their drones up north to St. Petersburg. So yeah, that's just to give you a sense of what we're saying then.
No, exactly. And by looking at the data, what we have seen substantial attrition of neighbor radar, which are one of the most high performance radar that Russia has. And also it's very important to say that in the bar chart, of course, we kept all the radar, all the system more or less together, but there are different types. So there are different types of radar, different types of S300, S400. So it's very complicated at a certain point. For example, just reading from the article, Nebo U 24 it, Nebo M 18, Nebo SVU 13, SV 2. So there are different types of radar hit, and that 58 is a big number, but also tell us that there are also different types of capability that has been significantly eroded. And
some of those radars, like some of the Nebo ones, are $100 million a pop. But it's not so much the financial cost of these, because really they're not going to be building them anytime soon, I wouldn't have thought. But it's the functional cost of losing them. I mean, you lose something like that, you lose a really, really significant capability. And then, and the whole point about kind of your article for me and where this is going is that this is a one-way direction of travel for Ukraine that's really positive. That actually you lose these, you don't recover these at the rate that you're losing them. I mean, these are phenomenal numbers, and then that means it's easier for Ukraine to strike other things. And if they are producing their FP1 and FP2 drones and missiles at scale, which they appear to be doing, then and they are going to be sending them at 200 a night, as they appear to be doing, then what you've seen the last 4 nights will continue and get even worse for Russia, and more drones and more missiles will get through, and it becomes a snowball effect that is only positive for Ukraine.
Yes, absolutely. And you can see these also by the type on Nebo that have been hit, because just to mention one, the second one in terms of hit is the M, and the M is a particular 3-band system that was designed to operate and to locate and to detect low observable object, not only stealth radar, but stealth aircraft, but also very small or essentially in the same size of and type of a drone. So or a missile, cruise missile. So the like Storm Shadow. So the fact that you are hampering down these capabilities is essentially an attempt to introduce as many holes in that net as possible. And I say net because a net already has holes. No airspace is 100% proof, especially in a situation like that one. The more you attire the asset that are supposed to look and identify threats, and you destroy also the means to destroy and neutralize the threat, it starts to become a challenge and also a dilemma, because as the more target and the more valuable target you strikes, the more the adversary have to understand what I should protect more, and also you start to put pressure on administration, because they are overprotecting Moscow. But at a certain point, maybe someone will argue, but why doing this? Why we cannot redistribute this? Of course, it's not going to happen, but you start to create problems, which are also political. And just to give you another hint, we were not able to identify everything, because you see there is not a small, but a significant category, which I called radar, other radar. We simply even if the text says, is this radar, we couldn't be able to identify it. So for fairness, we say, oh, this is a radar. That's definitely a radar, but we don't know the type. Or they provide, an image. Okay, you find a couple of news in Russia news, you find a couple of confirmation, okay, definitely a radar, but we don't know the type. We don't know what's inside there. So the situation could be even worse for some of these categories. And last but not the least, I want to stress that if you look again at the batteries that have been taken out, and you look at Pantsir has been hit systematically in conjunction with S300 and S400, because Pantsir is a point defense system which has been used most of the time to protect other high-value targets, in particular air defense system, radar. So the way on how Ukraine has played is incredible, because they've been able to first of all hit the escort, and then hit the radars. Sometime over the same night, sometime in the arc of a few days, even while Russians were moving away. So this is why, and also in the article, at the end, in my thread in the article, I tried to use these also as an example for ourselves, to look to us, because we shouldn't play these in a way that Russia is completely incompetent. Russia has been facing an asymmetrical war, where a potentially less capable adversary has used an asymmetrical doctrine to attire their higher-end equipment, to the point that it's not, I don't think Russia can keep going in this way. So or they adapt, or they will essentially have more issues, like the strike that you are just showing here, which, by the way, is not a case. This factory was producing a component also for radar and for air defense system. And the more these things happen, the more Russia will have trouble, which is good, of course, for
Yeah,
us.
I just think it's like this cumulative effect. I have said that the last few weeks and months, I think we've seen a turning point in the war. And I maintain that all of these weapons, whether it's the FP1, FP2, Storm Shadow, FP5, these are all, or at least potentially, game-changing weapons. Now, some people say these aren't game changers. Yes, they all are game changers. What you need is scale. So, for example, the Storm Shadow, 50 Storm Shadows isn't going to change the game. 5,000 Storm Shadows, suddenly you've got a changed game, because you can just fire them. Yeah, okay, you need some planes and so on and so forth. But what has happened recently is Ukraine has reached a point where there's a tipping point scale over which they are firing more stuff into Russia than Russia's firing into Ukraine, or at least if it's parity or even slightly less than Russia, they're doing it more effectively, so they're getting more bang for their buck and destroying more stuff. And that direction of travel is kind of one way, unless Russia can do something really significant different, such as destroying their production of these drones or so on and so forth.
I don't think Russia can destroy the production of
anything,
not because they are not capable of destruction of things, but because the way on how the Ukrainian industry is working is a very decentralized way. Despite they have factories, big factories, but they are not, first of all, they are a very close guarded secret for Ukraine. They are properly guarded. They have been hit as well. We know about that. But the fact is that Ukraine has shown a much higher capability to take a blow and carry on the fight. And of course, this is also relate to the fact that they are fighting an existential war for them. For them is or this or being annihilated. So I comprehend the human aspect, but also the political one. Zelensky and its administration, with all the potential mistake that any human being can do, invested heavily in drone capabilities, in these particular capabilities, and tried also to gather support from Europe, and I underline Europe, in order to develop this even more. And I think this was a very good point, because if they started to build traditional equipment like tank, IFVs, or very expensive kit at the beginning, a lot of resources would have been probably wasted. Instead, by having this incrementally innovative way to explore different technique, now they come back to us and say, look, if you want to defend from Shahid, we have prepared this platform, but we can work on this together, because of course they recognize that they have a lot of data, they have a lot of experience, but also Europe has an incredible technological know-how. And these two things together can really be significant. Now, when you say 5,000 Storm Shadow, I don't think they need the 5,000 Storm Shadow. The most important things is how you use the
it's
Storm
plucking
Shadow.
that number out
No,
my backside.
no, don't take me wrong. I'm saying this because many times there is this argument on say, oh, these are more, this weapon now doesn't have much an impact, they should be sent earlier, which all in all, I agree. If we have sent them 300 Storm Shadow when they were doing the Kharkiv offensive, probably everything would have different. But the reason is that not all the war are fought in the same way that we fought, I don't know, for example, for the American audience is the Gulf War, the first one.
Yeah.
Ukraine doesn't have those capabilities, even with our support. So what we can do with what we have now, try to completely paralyze, at least, or nearly paralyze their war, their defense industry, because is the biggest threat to Europe at the moment, aside the Putin regime and Russia, is its own defense, which I know that probably you know that I'm very much ranting about this every time I speak with someone, is keep going forward, is keep expanding. And so the more Ukraine is able to strike these capabilities, the better it is, because Russia will essentially struggle more and more. And also probably there will be more friction inside Moscow in order to see maybe there is a way out, for example, removing Putin or something like that. Because at the moment, as the business are going, Putin is going ahead whatever it takes. The problem is that we need to increase through these strikes and through a very systematic disassemblement of Russian defense industry, makes this war unsustainable. And Crimea is an example. Crimea has been one of the regions where we geolocated most of the strike. And there is a reason for that. The reason is because they want Crimea back, for sure, but they can't take them at the moment. So the best way is make it untenable. Okay?
So look, this is something that I've been speculating on for ages. So there's clearly an explicit project going on here to degrade the air defense capabilities and the radar and the target acquisition capabilities of the Russians on Crimea. To
Yes.
what end? So is this, I mean, you've got to do it anyway if you ever want to militarily take it back, but realistically, they're not going to invade Crimea, surely.
Yes, I agree.
So is this about being able to get planes closer to be able to start hitting them with other weaponry? I mean, you know, what is there? Is this just something that needs to happen anyway without a particular end in mind, or is this what do you think the end is for Crimea, for taking out the air defense?
Crimea there sits as a fortress in the Black Sea, and before the advent of unmanned naval drone, it was also the HQ of the Black Sea Fleet. Now the Black Sea Fleet is not anymore there, but the still are hosting all these platforms, which helps the war effort. So by completely destroying or rendering most of the equipment not active anymore in Crimea, you obtain more control of the sea, but also of the sky around the Crimea. You can start to fly drone, and maybe you can also at a certain point start to have some air incursion. And the point is this: if one day we start to see Storm Shadow fired not directly from Ukrainian airspace, but within Russia, because this means that this campaign of air defense system attrition has played out. Because I think if they have in mind to hit further and further with also European weapons, which has unfortunately limited the range, but have a very good capability in terms of warhead and being capable of maneuvering and outmaneuvering air defense system, they will become more and more audacious. But they are not full, so they are trying to, remove as many threats as possible.
Yeah, so this is a case of, say, we want to actually reach Novorossiysk with Storm Shadows more comprehensively. You can then start firing them from over here because you've attrited the Russian air defense over here. Or also, when you want to hit Krasnodar Krai and all this area down to Sochi, Tuapse, Novorossiysk, Kerch Bridge with drones, this, rather than dogleg around here, you can actually maybe just fly them straight over Crimea because you've attrited the...
Maybe not exactly over Crimea. That would be probably too much, but you can get closer. And yeah. Another point, it might be we are just making a very big speculation, and they are just relying on Russia incapability of changing. And so what they do, they destroy stuff so that it will get changed, and they destroy it again, which is something that we have seen because most of these systems have been destroyed more than once in those locations.
Yeah.
So there is also that, of course, without going too much into speculation.
Well, that's really important. So that perfectly brings me on to my analogy I always use is the blanket analogy. So Russia is a massive bloody country, right? And I always think of it like a bed, and you've got a blanket that's too small for the bed. And when you pull it up, the blanket up to your shoulders, then it exposes your feet. And you pull the blanket down to your feet, it exposes your arms or whatever. And that is the air defense. The air defense for Russia is not enough to cover the whole of Russia. And so what they are doing, so this is a layered defense, say in Moscow, they've pulled the blanket over Moscow, but that exposes everywhere else because they don't have enough air defenses for elsewhere. And so when you hit Crimea and they think we need to pull more air defenses into Crimea, of course, that is a zero-sum game. So what adds to Crimea takes from somewhere else. And that then leaves holes for Ukraine to then hit somewhere else. As an analogy. Does that make sense? Are you there?
No, makes. I was thinking, because you see that the other point that here makes sense, and I think you see, you look at this map, which is quite accurate because people doing these in the end has access more than has to satellite imagery, geolocation, and so on. You can imagine how this image will look like to people in Perm, Kazan, any other city that has a very big military asset that should be defended, which are not. I mean, Yalabuga probably is one of the very few cases where you have some air defense, but still
I want to talk to you about that. We'll come on to that.
So imagine if these places start to get hit. How you justify that level of defense? Okay, there is the capital, but what about the rest? So, I mean, it's very likely that nothing will happen, but still you are putting a lot of pressure politically, internally. And the problem is this: they have some equipment that needs to be protected. And we have seen the effect of this decision of moving away asset when the Ukrainian very, very boldly damaged, I think destroyed, but damaged the over-the-horizon radar, the early warning radar in the south. And that was, of course, a bit on the edge because, of course, it can cause some kind of misunderstanding. But in the end, this demonstrated that Russia has a very big trouble in protecting its most precious asset. And this is a reflection that we should put on ourselves as well, because if you think at rough air bases, they are not that protected even now. And we have seen just a few days ago in the US drones around US bases in US. So you can imagine where this led. So I'm trying essentially here to point to two problems. The first one is that Ukraine has done a hell of a job and has exposed all the vulnerabilities of Russia. Russia is not unbeatable. There is no one that is unbeatable. The only difference is how you proceed and how you systematically remove the advantage that your adversary has. And for Russia, one is the size of the country, which makes it very difficult to reach everywhere with a single system. And the other one is the number. They had a very large inventory of everything. We don't have in Europe, and this is why I always say Europe should be more cautious on how we deal with attrition, because I know that we don't plan to fight a war of attrition, but what happens if your adversary obliges you to fight one? Yeah. You can't say, oh, no, I'm not going to fight this because my doctor say I can't. No, you will fight that. So I know that we can't do the same, but we should think on ways on how we can manage attrition, at least manage, not completely overcome, because it's nearly impossible unless you are a country with the imperialistic domain, because you need, we have to be frank. The reason why we had a very large amount of equipment during Cold War was because we were close and sure that at some point we would have a massive World War III war. After that period, things changed, so we didn't have this reserve, and maintaining such a reserve maybe it's very expensive. So drones, of course, can offset a little bit, but we need conventional deterrence as well, because Europe doesn't have a long-range missile. We don't have a missile that can hit 1,000 kilometers.
This is why Ukraine needs to be in NATO. It's not for Ukraine's benefit, it's for NATO's benefit. Bloody hell. I mean, just it seems obvious to me. I want to go back to this, because actually this graph perfectly illustrates my blanket analogy. So you've got Moscow in the south is quite warm now. It's got the blanket on it. Thank you very much. But that blanket has pulled stuff away from, moving the blanket to these areas has pulled stuff away from Eastern Central Russia, Leningrad, and the Baltic Fleet area. Now, obviously, there's attrition involved as well. And attrition in the southern area would likely have caused them to pull stuff from here to consistently pull into these areas as they get attrited. But I think that does a good job of kind of explaining that analogy. You mentioned Yalabuga. Yalabuga is just the single most important target for Ukraine. So the question is, why has that not been struck? It is a long way from Ukraine. It's some 1,300 plus kilometers. It is going to be at the extent of the drone range at the moment for the Ukrainians. It can be reached supposedly by the 3,000 kilometer range FP5 Flamingo missiles, but they don't seem to have gone for it yet. What is your understanding of what keeps the Ukrainians? I mean, they have reached it before. In the early days, they got a big sort of plane drone that just missed. It went in between, I think, the dormitories there and another building. And they've hit it occasionally here and there with the odd drone. But essentially, it's not been hit. Are they waiting to be able to take it all out with a definite single kind of mass strike? Is it just the air defense is too good there? Is it the range? What is going on with why Yalabuga hasn't been hit? Because it's such an obvious target.
I think one of the reasons why Yalabuga is such a difficult target is because the extension of the site is significant. So essentially, you have a very large, very large factory. So essentially, it's not just a small building. And then you have the distance. The distance is important. And why is important for our audience? Because the further away you go, you can reach with a drone, but the amount of payload that you can bring becomes quite small. I mean, not that big to inflict a damage. And what you want to avoid is that you identify, for example, I may go using a cruise missile or a drone, I can go in this direction because I see there is a flow in the air defense system. You want to exploit it when you are sure you are going to do harm, you are going to be effective. Because otherwise, the Russians are not stupid. They will learn, they use that strategy, we will counter that. So I think they are, of course, they want to do this, but a bit, there are probably, I don't know exactly how these things work in these systems, but I'm sure there is a list or a plan. There are also vision for what's coming next. And so probably there will be also internal discussion on what should be priority and what not. This is how I feel this. And And so I think that distance and extension of the site is critical. However, if I can mention one thing that unfortunately there was a study from I think was the Center for Strategic Studies. They did a magnificent job on Yalabuga. I really love that study, but there is a complete decision to don't focus also on the other ways on how you can at least delay the production of an item, which is also by limiting the raw materials required to produce that item. Now,
Exactly.
in the case of Shahed, you can imagine that the carbon fiber are one of these, and there is a production of carbon fiber inside the Yalabuga, and there is ways on how you can stop this production, at least for a certain amount of time. I wrote an article on Yalabuga, and we identified that there is a site producing oxygen and nitrogen that is normally used for cracking down pan in order to produce a carbon fiber, and is a much lighter target than hitting the entire plant. You won't destroy the plant, you won't stop completely the plant, but you will somehow delay enough
Yeah,
the
this is
production.
what Will Till was talking about yesterday in my live that you referenced earlier, that he was saying an oxygen facility had been hit. And I was talking about how it's clear that they are saying, right, it's too difficult to make sure that we can take out Yalabuga. So what can we take out that Yalabuga is contingent upon? It is, in order to make a finished product of a Shahed drone, they assemble a lot at Yalabuga, and they are probably manufacturing a lot from scratch, but things like explosives for the warheads, they're going to be made elsewhere. You're going to have chemicals factories to make those. So you're seeing Ukraine routinely hit chemicals factories, and it happened last night. Yep, fertilizer factories, but they're going to be making chemicals as well for explosives. And so if you can hit those places that are less protected, less well protected, and are closer to Ukraine, then actually it doesn't matter about hitting Yalabuga so much, because they still can't make the drones because you've hit those raw materials.
No, that's another way. And for example, just to give you an example, there was a period where we were surprised that they were hitting plant and kind of distillery. We classify as distillery, but in reality they were producing the base for solvent that then are used in lubricant. So the way on how, and this also. If you study the history of the home front in UK, in British history during the Second World War, also probably first, but I'm more aware about the Second World War. This is exactly what normally countries at war do. They convert partially or totally certain activities in order to manufacture those materials that you need, like lubricant.
Yeah. So, I mean, learning from history how much are we seeing? How much is this war different to World War II then, in terms of how, say, the Ukrainians are going about things, how the Russians are going things, or how much is it just the same as what we saw previously with just slightly different technology?
No, I think in terms of home front, we see exactly the same type of of also human response. The fact that people tends to, for example, I have always an argument with people that say, "Oh, drones in Ukraine are very cheap." Yes, it's true, but there is a reason why, because there is a lot of engineers, a lot of volunteer that work in order to protect the country. So there is this collective effort, sometimes even decentralized, that allows a very complex project to take place also when you have very limited resources. Because we have to remember that Ukraine saved itself many times during these 4 years. And I remember when I was observing the collapse of Avdiivka, That was one of my last work on FPV, and I could pinpoint all the avenue of attack of the Russian with the attack with FPV drones. And that was the period where we essentially mismanaged the production of 155, and essentially they have much less artillery shell, and so they were under very big difficulties, but they managed with the drone to put a patch on that Russian penetration. And after that, if you've seen, I always say to everyone, oh, Russians are trying to, they are advancing, they are penetrating. The problem is that one thing is, conquering a settlement, but another is making sure that you can sustain that advance, because the logistic is key. And with drones, this has become more and more difficult, because now we call this the kill zone. But if you want, we can play this reverse. Think about Kursk.
Yeah.
Kursk was a magnificent operation in the first few weeks, but then had some issues, and then essentially scaled back. And the reason why they have to pull out at a certain point,
it's because that single road into it got
exactly
hammered and
with
logistics.
the fiber optic. And this was, for example, we have to say this was a kind of a point of a small victory, because they fielded something new that was immune to EW, which the Ukrainian for that operation did in a very, very high levels. I mean, they operated the electronic warfare and anti-drone technologies in a very, very strong way, to the point that the Russians were completely overwhelmed in the first 2 weeks. That I remember was nothing that they can do. So this is where I think is very important.
Do you think with these long range drone strikes, so for example, when you look at let's see if I can get it here, Primorsk, right? So this is Primorsk on fire still after repeated attacks. And you've got Ust-Luga. I mean, there's loads of stuff still coming out at the moment. These supreme successes of the Ukrainians over the last few days, they've just been absolutely phenomenal. Fire intensifies at the Russian terminal at Primorsk, so more from Primorsk there, as you've got satellite imagery showing that. Things, burning all over the shop. This is Ust-Luga still on fire. Do you think there's any serious air defense at these places? Have the Russians just stripped them all bare? Do you think the Ukrainians just overwhelm those air defenses? Do they ever target the air defenses there with drones themselves? Do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't have any specific knowledge of the site, but if you recollect from the past, as soon as we had the initiation of the strike on ammo depot, on oil refinery, we have seen that most of the defenses on this site were pretty much, manned. So people with a high caliber rifle, with in some cases they use electric warfare gun, which they are not effective with this type of drones, and essentially Kalashnikov or rifles. We haven't seen real, like even a gun-based system, a static one. So, and there are different reasons for that. I mean, you would imagine that these sites are already under the umbrella of the air defense system, but the problem is that you just need one to have an issue, because essentially you just need one drone that hit one of those tanks to create a very large explosion.
Yeah, that's what Will Till was saying yesterday. That when they had a salvo of 6 missiles at one particular place. I think it was the ballistic missile factory that was hit some months back. That or about 6 weeks ago, that was 1 missile out of 6 that was sent, and that's all you kind of need. Ideally, it'd be great if all 6 got through, but you're trying to work out what your efficiency rates are, what the likelihood of something getting through. And obviously, the more missiles and more drones you send, the more that are going to get through. But you're not expecting them all to get through.
Well, so the point is also this: when you are this formulating essentially when you decide to hit something, the likelihood of hitting that target depends on different things, and weather, air defense, luck, because sometimes you have a problem with the system, so it fails. But in particular, here you are hitting a static target, a refinery, which is significantly large. So it's very difficult to miss. It's very difficult to have issues in locating. For example, hitting an air defense system, which is also mobile, requires a lot of intelligence work done before. And this is why these strikes are even more significant, in my opinion, because
Right.
and also I'm always speak with the like this is a strike on a Tor. I'm always speak with the eyes of someone that want to learn out of this, because this means that they have a very good situation awareness of the front line, but also beyond the front line. Because in order to know where the batteries are, where if they are manned or not, if there is any counter drones system. So this is a very systematic understanding of the rears.
That's a good point. You kind of take for granted the amount of reconnaissance drone work and maybe human intelligence work that is going into these strikes. I mean, sorry, carry on. You not finished.
No, yeah. I mean, my last point was exactly this. In these strikes, you see few seconds, but there are probably weeks of work in order to perform every one of these strikes, and everyone is focused on the self-guiding, the AI, but the amount of information, intelligence gathering, and also processing through probably also with AI. Data is key, and data can be geolocation, signal intelligence, and human intelligence. These, most of these systems, also in Crimea, is in territory that, believe or not, are full of partisans, are full of people that are collaborating with Kiev for a simple reason: they want to go back and want to repel the Russians. So this is also why we see this large amount of strikes. And when you start to see these similar strikes, not only in occupied region, but also in Russia, that is a different thing. This means that there is also more situation awareness, also very deep.
Now, for these sorts of strikes you're seeing on the screen at the moment, I'm fascinated in these, and I don't know how far your expertise goes here, but sometimes I think, these are like FP2 drones, which range from 60 kilograms warhead to 158 kilogram warhead, but generally they used to be 60 or 105. Now that the larger warheads are going to be overkill for something like this, but they're also using things like Balava drones and whatnot that are 5 kilogram, more like your Lancets, but then they're more likely not to cause catastrophic destruction. But something like a 60 kilogram warhead striking a single vehicle like this is going to finish that vehicle. I wonder, like, several questions here. Like, why are the drones not getting shot down, but found by these targets and shot down by these targets? Is the first thing, and then how difficult are these things to fly? And what drones do you think are being used here, and what size warhead, so on and so forth? Do you have any knowledge on that?
So for the first two, I can give you an answer pretty much. For the last two, I'm not a drone expert, so I will give you my engineering reasoning. But for these, unfortunately, I don't have exact data for that. But we were working on that as well, to try to but it's very difficult because you don't have any clue of what drone is being used, or you believe what they say to you, or you have somehow some other source, which is very difficult. Now, putting that aside for a moment, so you say why these are not shot down. I can counter who tells you that no other one has been shot down in the process, because you don't see them. So that's the first point. And we have to be fair. It's possible that you fire 5 drones and only one reach, but it's the one that reached that matters.
Now, of course.
But there is also the possibility now, by looking at these systems were stationary. They were not evading. There are cases. If you look in we have an Excel spreadsheet, so if you have patience, you can go through all the videos. all 392, and you will find some cases where the book start to run. You can run for the life and then get destroyed. So you understand that they understood that they were attacked. A situation awareness, Jonathan. The problem and one of the key issue now is how you transmit to the soldiers on the field that they have been targeted. This is why, for example, there was a very good article, I think, from a US journalist did a very nice interview with one of the Ukrainian inventor of the FPV drone detector that show you the monitor, the view of the FPV drone that is coming to you. You see yourself, so you see that you are targeted. And this is saving countless lives. I also fundraised for a few of them. And they are loved by the soldier because they do not do much. I mean, they don't avoid the attack, but they give you awareness. And being aware sometimes give you those few, maybe a minute, maybe 30 seconds to get cover, to go out from the vehicle. Better they destroy the vehicle, but not the people inside. So this is, I think, the reason why we see this, because and also because these are stationary target. They are mobile, but they operate stationary. The book and I think also the Tor for sure have to lift the radar to operate. And in some cases you can see the radar spinning, so they are looking for target, but the drone is not only low because it's not a problem of altitude, but it's too small to be seen. What you can deploy in these cases, that there are a lot of fantasy on this. You can start to think about network of audio sensors in order to spot incoming threat, but how you distinguish between an incoming drone which is friendly and one that is enemies. You know, you start to enter in a very serious nightmare of situation awareness. But this is the point, and this is also why NATO is investing so much in these sensors, in these capabilities, and why AI is everyone has this AI war, because you can have a lot of sensor, but you may not have the ability to process the data, and AI technically have much more ability to do that. This is a beautiful strike of a long-range radar, for example. So that's I think, I hope this answer to your first two questions. Now, regarding the warhead, I think pretty much depends on what you are given. Sometimes soldiers have a mission. They know that they have some kind of just a second. They have some kind of task, so they have requested certain types of drones, and then they have delivered that drone. They have to do the strike.
They don't want to overkill, so they want to use a 158 kilogram warhead to take out like a vehicle.
Yeah, and also because for a book, a radar, the book, for example, if it's loaded, you don't need a very big warhead, because you can just make the missile cook off and then it's done. So the other point is that you don't need to destroy a radar effectively. You don't need a very large warhead. You need a lot of shrapnel, metal shrapnel around to destroy the wavelength.
Yeah, so even a near miss is with these sensitive pieces of equipment going to do a good job on them. I mean, are these sometimes they look quite difficult to fly because they're kind of dipping left and right, and you're wondering again. You wonder how many miss or whatnot. They also do seem to travel in groups because they do their own battle damage assessment by flying over, like you've just seen then, flying over, seeing what the one before's done. Obviously, the intention would be that if that one missed, then this second or third or whatever missile then will go for that same target. But like this one here, right, that target's gone. Either I'm going to hit somewhere else on that target, or I then go off and find my secondary target or something like that, I presume. But I'm just sort of guessing.
So it really depends, because there are situations where the drone is in scouting and then knows that there are a certain number of targets in the area, and then search the closer or the easier. Other cases where the drone has a target, you know that you have to hit that, so you go for that, and that's it. So, but this, we are entering really much in an area where we don't have information, because we don't know how they operate at this level of detail.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to find out everything as the war finishes and as the years go by, exactly what was going on, all aspects of the war, all these like different projects that they probably have put in place, and what the Ukrainian and Russian intelligence services are doing inside each country, how they operate trends. There's so much of this war that I'm sure will blow our minds when we eventually find out. Um, is there anything else that you think we need to know with regard to what the work you've done, or anything else you want to discuss? Any salient points that we've missed?
No, I think we covered everything, and the only other things that you would like to do is trying to play the map. There is a play button there, and then and if you activate, there is if you open it, I can show you, because it has also engagement rings. So essentially, for the system where we knew the range, so there is an arrow on the left. You see on the left, up. Yeah, there.
I can't.
You see there is a small arrow on the
Oh,
screen.
so yes. So I've
Oh,
got
this
quite a
open the
lot
menu.
shiny in my face.
There
Right,
is at the
yes,
very end, there is engagement rings, which
right.
is disabled. If you
Yeah,
click on that, it will show you the coverage.
right.
And
So for each of those
yeah,
things that have been blown up.
and these will show you essentially the range of those systems, and also
Wow,
why
some of those are serious systems then.
yeah, the Nebo are the longest one, for 400 kilometers. There are also the S300 that have a significant range. And if you play it, it will show you essentially where all the area has been degraded. But if you look these, you can see that there is a significant action in 3 locations: Belgorod, Crimea, and close to Rostov.
Yeah, and that's about different corridors. I mean, it's interesting that I keep talking about how it must have happened in Bryansk, but we just don't have the details of it.
Okay,
Because
for
that's the
that
corridor.
we don't know.
Yeah, because there's that corridor that they're using now, and they had to have cleared that out in order for them to continue using that. I mean, they're using that night after night, but they're also Belgorod, partly because that's Belgorod city, and they're targeting that, but also partly because that's going to be your pathway up, maybe to Saratov, Samara, Tambov, Tula, all these regions here that they routinely hit. And then you've got that northern Luhansk route, that's more likely to be Volgograd and then up to Saratov. And then you've got Crimea, which is maybe your pathway through to the Black Sea coastline down here. And so, these all make a lot of sense. It's just weird that you're missing. I'm sure they haven't released the data of the videos of what they've done in Bryansk.
That's another important point. This is based on data that we found mainly from Ukrainian source, but also Russian source. So these are all the data available, or that at least we were able to find. And there are probably more. And these are only the geolocated one. We have more than 432 that has not been geolocated, which may be in Bryansk.
Well, yeah. So goodness me. So 432 technically need
and
to
you are
be added
looking
to
only
this, which is like
173.
So that's 173. You've got another 432. So my goodness,
sorry,
that's
432 is the total. Over the 400,
total,
sorry,
of which
433 is
100.
the total.
Yeah. So okay. So you've got then another, whatever it is, 300, 280 or something. I don't know. I've not done my maths there, but you've got a lot more to put on there than are already there. So that obviously tells its own story. I mean, this is phenomenal what Ukraine has been able to achieve. And as I keep saying, I'm really positive about Ukraine at the moment, because I think that scale has been hit. And if what you're seeing, what you've seen for 4 nights in a row is what they can achieve every single night, then the Russians must be cacking themselves at the moment. They must surely be thinking, well, what's going to happen tonight? Are they going to revisit all of those places in St. Petersburg again? Where are they going to hit? Because if they're making 200 of these things a day, it's just relentless. And the Russians are thinking, we have had our air defenses and radars degraded, and they are getting degraded with each passing day. Then this is just going to get worse and worse. Way.
Yes. I think this is essentially what is going to happen unless something happen that completely change the game. But I don't see anything that could change. The worst that can happen is that Ukraine keeps doing strikes on air defense, and they keep essentially they lose a certain amount of system. They barely manage to produce them. So is a one-to-one. But again, this will put a lot of strain and even a question for them, because what happens if one of those plants get hit for good? Then who is going to produce? And on these, I'm quite concerned about China, because China has been one of the key provider of indirect support for war material production, and this is ultra known. Now,
I wrote an article right at the beginning of the war to say that China is the only option for Russia to prevail in this war. This is the March 2022, something like that. I was like, Russia have lost the war, because I said, look, Russia planned on a special military operation over 3 days. It failed. It accidentally turned into war. They hadn't planned for a war. They then had these maximalist objectives for the war, which couldn't be achieved. And, they aren't going to militarily take Kiev, right? So that is not going to happen. So they've lost the war, right? But the only way they can, at least in the maximalist understanding, the only way they could kind of scapegoat to win the war or achieve more than they're looking at the moment is if China really does come in and help them to as much as possible. That is my worry. So I think it's a good point that you make to say that is one of the few kind of potential game changers for Russia.
Yeah, and no, yeah. So my only concern, I mean, is for what regards China, is that it's the overall. I mean, China is for sure at the moment is an entity that is helping Russia in different ways, but at the same time, I think is like a kind of poisonous food for Russia. Why? Because Russia is depleting most of its forces in the east. Is depleting most of his manpower from the east, and is not investing much, probably nothing, in those regions, which have at the moment a very big influence from China. And these are territories which in the 60s and 70s there was nearly a war between China and Russia. With Russia,
and that's why Russia had all of those air defense systems were lined up. Previously, before the war started, all their air defenses were lined up on the Chinese border, because that's what they're worried about. And they pulled them from there to plug them into the holes in Ukraine. And so China must be thinking, well, if worse comes to the worst, we can just have Manchuria back or something.
Yeah, and I don't think they will have even to fight, because people are sick of it. And the way on how Moscow treat this region is very much like a slave region. They take the resources, they take the men, they give very little, and they are by far the poorest areas in Russia. There are even worse, but those areas are quite poor. So, and most of the money, most of the commerce, most of the things is in connection with China. So, on some aspect, I not fear, but I'm concerned about the support that China can give, because it is at scale. But at the same time, I think that China has different plans, in terms of Russia, and the
Russians know that the more they rely, the more they rely on China, the more of a vassal state they become. And I think they were worried before the war that they were becoming like a vassal state of China anyway. I mean, those you had supposedly had Russian military commanders saying, or political peeps saying, look, we don't want. We need to be wary of China. It's a marriage of convenience. We're not really that aligned. It's very transactional. And actually, as the war's gone on, as China's helped more and more, it's just shown the dependency of Russia on China. And then, of course, that gives inordinate leverage for China to take advantage of Russia and get Russia to do exactly what it wants them to do.
And there is also another aspect that I think we are approaching to the conclusion. So, and I want to reply to one of your questions regarding how this situation looks like World War II. And I want to give you an example that is not mine, but comes from a professor, Sarah Payne. I think it's very famous now on YouTube because many of her lessons now are online. But by the way, I think she's now as visiting professor in the UK. So would be nice to have a chat with her at some point. Who knows? But anyway, she made a very beautiful example on how different was and how more effective and successful the alliance of the UK, British Empire, United States, and Russia at the time, Soviet Union, was respect the axis. And one of the reasons was that there was a relatively openness and understanding of the threat, but also very clear design, very clear objective, and essentially they were trusting each other. Okay, so the Brits and the US gave a lot of resources to Russia with only a single objective. You have to focus on Nazi Germany. You have to defeat them. You have to sustain whatever it takes. We will give you whatever you need. Now they forgot about this, but this is why Russia didn't collapse. And instead, on the other, the axis of how they were working, they were allied, but they were working on its own independent nationalistic objectives. Germany wanted all Europe and its empire. Italy wanted its little bit and went in Greece, went in Africa, made a mess. And Japan declared war to US without any reason to doing that. And all these things because they didn't even trust each other. There was a very much convenience, but was not even that strong. And these characterize always alliance between democracies and alliance with bullies. We can argue that we had a bully in the club. Yes, we had. Stalin was definitely a tyrant, but he found two persons like Roosevelt and Churchill that they were very much, and then the end Truman, they were very much on the spot, and they made clear their plan and they made clear their expectation. And of course, there was other things underneath, but for the war, for what was the war, that was very clear, was very direct. And so I think this is one of the things that you can see. We are not as good as we want with the Ukraine, but we are honest. We want them to succeed. But we're still in the process to understand that we have to work on our foot independently from US, and we need to be bold. But this doesn't mean that we sell out Ukraine. And I think if Ukraine has a stand for 4 years, it's because people, and this happens every time, and I'm sure it happens also to you, every time I speak with Ukrainians, volunteer, soldier, and you say, oh, I've done this, but it's very little. They literally, you can see their eyes, the gratitude, because they see we don't feel alone. And when you don't feel alone, it's because you have allies that care about you and try to do their best. Of course, we have also moment where we were not as good as we wanted, but we try our best to help them and to be frank and open, and we are doing the right thing. Whatever happen, whatever decision is made, have to be made by the Ukrainians. Whatever is to have a ceasefire, has a peace, has whatever, because it's their land. We can only give them help to achieve what they think is their vision of victory, and we can give a suggestion, of course, but we cannot oblige them, as Trump, for example, said many times.
100%.
And sorry for this monologue, but
no,
this is what I feel.
Absolutely spot on. You looks like you've got some more work cut out for you, because this is apparently an S-300 launcher just firing at Kharkiv and then getting hit, although you can't see what the kamikaze drone is able to achieve. There's no battle damage assessment here, but you got another S-300 being hit, so that's fantastic. Potentially, I mean, who knows where exactly that launcher is and how close that drone is able to get and what the size of the warhead is.
Yeah, just to let you know, the data is half March, and we have to stop recording because otherwise Chris, which is now listening, would have killed us with an arrow because we were saying, Chris, we have other 35 strike. Can you redo the stat, please?
This is
No.
Chris, who's just said, just catching up again. Thanks for the props, JP. Hey, Daniela. So he's like, stop giving me data. I've got to make these
He very,
graphs.
very kindly told me, Daniele, is this the last data? Because I am an archer, you know. And
Yeah.
then he said, oh, but I remember you made missiles, so maybe.
Good man. There's also going to be some good news coming from Berdiansk, hopefully with a ship that appears to have been hit. Right, just before you go, Daniela, if you don't mind, if I can take the time to just thank some of my my supporters here. Thank you to Richard Bennett, who has gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships, and thank you to Niels Knudsen, who has also done likewise. Really appreciate that kind of support, and I really appreciate the members who are long-standing or new members to the channel. Thank you for your support. And someone's already shown how you can join, follow Tochnyi in their YouTube channel. Please go to Tochny's website, just Google it, you'll find it, and that would be fantastic if you can support them. The Pirate, up to 63,000 subscribers now. Yep, grinding on. Thank you very much, Pirate, for your support, my friend. And please hit the like, subscribe, and all those kind of things. It helps. So thank you, Pirate, for reminding people. Julian Rossiter, thoughts on the likelihood of some sort of European defence force being formed in the near future? So that'd be the last question to you. But before I pose that to you, and thanks, Julian, for that. Captain T, obvious, gifting 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's really kind, Captain. Thank you. You are obviously an awesome human. So, Daniela, thoughts on the likelihood of some sort of European defence force? I mean, you are not living in the EU presently. You are UK based, but you are obviously not British by birth. So, what are your thoughts on the European defence force and in whether it's more likely now? I mean, it certainly is more likely now, but what do you think the likelihood is?
So, well, I think the necessity makes the man. So and the woman. I think this is more likely to happen now than before the war. That's for sure. But I don't think is a very short term objectives. I would like to see more collaboration in terms of defense production and capabilities, trying to overcome this sectarism of each, because I understand that each nation has its own pride, and it's fine. We have to accept it. We can't battle that. Despite I'm Italian as birth, I'm British as
Yeah.
as a second one, and I
Yeah.
feel pride when I see Storm Shadow and
Oh, cool.
British equipment doing what they've been tasked for, and also protecting the people. Like, for example, the Triton now has been deployed, has been a success. Is defending the people, and this is what it matters most to me. And so I think we should try to figure out a way to know how to collaborate in a constructive way on defense platform, having less type of vehicles, try to standardize them, because one of the issues that you can see in this type of war is attrition. And by formation, I'm an engineer, and one of the issues that you had at the beginning of the war was supply chain. Many missiles, many components were essentially available, but the spare parts were not, because who was tasked to produce them now didn't exist anymore. And you try to look for another country that has a similar system, but there are differences, because you have your local version, which is different from another version, because you want your own, you know what I mean, which is understandable, but
Yeah.
we need to try to figure out a compromise, because Ukraine saved Europe. I'm not exaggerating here, because if Russia had unleashed the same amount of violence and destruction in the Baltics, I'm not sure we would be able to counter these in a very good way, because simply, I mean, Germany didn't have enough ammunition for a day of fight, just to mention one. So the Italy was and UK were better because they have very old Cold War stuff still in the inventory, but not much. So I think in the short term, I don't see, unfortunately, this type of single European army. I hope to see UK back in the club of European Union to any extent.
Yeah, you and me both.
I don't want to say that I'm still very debated. I'm more pro-Labour rather than conservative. But I'm very critical about politicians. And in UK, at least, you still have on certain topics bipartisanship, which is good and which should be good. So I hope that the UK can become closer and closer to Europe rather than further and further away. But for industry, something that we can reach in the close term because we need that.
Yeah, that move away from dependency on the United States is a way of, it's like that halfway house before you get to a combined army. It's like a Europe that is manufacturing militarily with a combined goal, with a unified sort of goal that's a Europe first goal, if you like.
Yeah.
You know, reacting against the America first kind of movement to isolate the US from us, to eschew the NATO alliance. But at the same time, they need that because they want us to buy all their kit, because actually their economy is somewhat dependent upon a massive military expenditure from themselves, but a massive military expenditure from NATO allies buying American kit, or other allies buying American kit. Well, if Europe goes, yeah, no, we're not going to have that, we're going to spend 65% of our budget now on European produced goods, then that's going to hurt the US. So I think the US has shot themselves in the foot from an economic strategic point of view with their foreign policy decision making and rhetoric, and Europe needs to now just fully invest in itself going forward, and then that gives you a springboard to creating your own army, if that's something that eventually comes about.
Yeah, definitely, because you cannot have your own army. I mean, we have to be honest, there are some stuff that the US does way better. Stealth technology, in radar, they are very good, of course, and also missile. But we have our unicorn, like Kronsberg in Norway, MBDA. I mean, the problem that affect these companies, not the quality. In general, Europe is not affected by the quality of the product, whatever it is, a defense product or is a civilian product, but the scale and the capability of producing and selling these in Europe at a good price that makes affordable for everyone to buy European, and then export it. So this is the key, and we have, and this will drive also innovation, because with the revenue you can reinvest. Instead, if you don't export, or your export is not at a high level in terms of technology, you stagnate a little bit. Europe has a very key areas where we are very good. For example, many people know nowadays about lithography. We have essentially one of the largest company producing this machine that are capable of making chips. But we should do this in many other fields in order to have a kind of European dominance, but not a bad one, a good one, in the sense that we can also export the wealth, the knowledge, and also some of our values, but not in the way that we used to know, like during the Iraq war, we are bringing democracy. No, we have to show that there is another way, the European way. And this is something that also with China could play a little bit, because Chinese have been in Europe, in UK, and they have seen that there are other ways to go on. And now that China is struggling economically, they say, you removed us all our right, you removed us all our freedom, and you promised us wealth, but we don't see wealth, and we see even more oppression. Maybe there is another way. So this is the way on how you dismantle, in the long run, tyrant regime. And this is why, for example, it was a very bad move from Trump administration to cut US aid, because those type, the British Council, for example, is a British version of USAID, where you export
soft
your
power
value,
through
exactly, and that pays off, helps a lot, and
yeah, I think they're going to rue a lot of decisions in terms of I think, and Will Teal talked about this yesterday. Oh no, I was talking about this with him after we did the live. But the idea that everything Trump is doing at the moment is taking American power. Like, there's already this move away from having the dollar underwriting everything, and I don't want to go down. Just the shortcut would be that everything they do at the moment is removing the US from the top of the power structure in the world. You might look at them flexing in Iran, but actually really what's happening is that's going to force people to move away from fossil fuels, to move away to green tech, which is actually favoring China. People are just going to be moving away from wanting to use the dollar. Like, the EU's just done a trade deal with India where they're going to be doing trade in euros and not the dollar. And so basically Trump has expedited moving the US from the top of the power structure to much further down. It's my opinion. And just someone has said, Captain Obvious, Guy Verhofstadt, who's very a former Belgian prime minister, very pro EU guy. He was an advocate for a unified European army some years back. So there is some animo within the EU. Reading his latest book, Citizens in Revolt, not sure it is translated into English. So actually, I always wanted to read his book, Europe's Last Chance, Why the European States Must Form a More Perfect Union, where he talks about the new age of empires, which is kind of just what we were talking about. Like, the US is an empire over here, China and Russia over there. Europe needs to work out what its place is in the world, or the EU needs to work out what its place is in the world in this new age of empires. And yeah, so I guess we'll leave it there. Any final words, Daniela, at all?
No, I think we went overall on everything, and just one thing is that if I can, in Tochnyi at the moment we are looking for a social media manager as a volunteer. So there is an application on our website. I don't have the link, but if you go on Tochnyi website, yes, there is there, the Join Tochnyi Social Media Manager Volunteer. So we are looking for someone because the workload on us has been coming too big, and also on Chris. So if you want to see Chris going out to do archery more often, sign in. No, jokes aside, we are looking for someone, even with the limited experience, but with some experience, to run as a social media manager of Tochnyi, because we really need one, because we are overwhelmed with all the activities. Because behind every research, there is a researcher doing the actual not calculation, but essentially the research work. Essentially, there is a who proofread, who make the images, and then we have recently established a group that manage the publication. So how we interact with press and other things. So we start to become a lot of work for people that already have a lot of other activities. So
yeah,
we are looking for someone essentially.
Absolutely, and what is a worthy organization to help out with. And if you have time, please follow Daniele Hartree Fock on Twitter, where he posts and gives you an indication of what he's been up to and what he's researching. So there's another great, and obviously Tochnyi as well on all the social media sites. So yeah, do that now, everybody. If you haven't done it already, what are you doing with your lives? Go and follow Tochnyi. Look, thank you, Daniela. I really do appreciate the time you have spent with us. I know you've got things to do, so you probably need to get a shift on. But look, thank you for your time. Thank you to the mods. Thank you to the super chatters and the members of my community here. I really appreciate you. It keeps the lights on. And I guess all I have to say is Slava Ukraini, and final words to Daniela.
Heroyam Slava.
Good on you, mate. Good on you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And stay tuned, because we have probably another article coming out, not by me, by our researcher. So this will be a busy week.
Awesome stuff. Well, look forward to it. As Wenzel says, thank you, Daniela. Very informative and a joy to be here. Toodle pits, everybody.
Me too. Bye-bye.